I think that one of the things we don't do enough of on Asians Represent is have voices from, all over Asia. We had our Al Qadim show, which is unfortunately on hiatus for health reasons. But
Mm.
I think it's really important that when you think, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be Asian, and when we talk about like Asian Americans or in Europe or people who are in Asia, it's a really complicated term. And when people are talking about Asian movies, we tend to erase a lot of diversity within the Asian community when we make generalizations.
Mm.
And when we were looking at all of our content, we were like, we have like a diverse array of perspectives, but it can be better. And I got some comments, and a lot of people were looking at it like, oh, everybody here is East Asian. And in my head, I was like, you know what? I mean, that's wrong, because one of our hosts is Southeast Asian, and we have people on all the time from different parts of the world. But that doesn't mean that we should turn down criticism. That just means that we can do better. So I am super excited for this episode, because we've got, two returning faces to Asians Represent, and one face and perspective who we've been meaning to collaborate with for honestly a really long time. And I'm going to say that's on me. That's on me. No, that's on me. Like in tightening up how we do all of our production, we're able to do more now and be more efficient. And that means we can have more people on the show. So I'm really hyped. So it's been a while since we've had 2 out of 3 of you on the show, and it's been too long since we've had one of you join us on the show. So for our audiences, I'm going to do an introduction on all of you. I did some research on all of your work. I'm also fans of all of you, so that wasn't difficult or an arduous task to do, because that means I'm like, oh, I know some really dope people. Like, they're really cool. Like, I think everybody on Asians Represent is cooler than me, and I think that's how you should live your life, because you should always surround yourself with people who you believe add something to the world and your life. If people aren't doing that, like, what are you doing, right? So let's start with, and I wrote this in my notes, the best Twitter handle on the internet is a evil clever dog. The best story about a Twitter handle ever, for those of you who don't know, is a Twitter handle is based on a knockoff Transformers toy, which I would have never expected until you actually told us that story. Is a evil clever dog. Transformers enthusiast is what I wrote here. Designer, master level cosplayer, streamer, and I wrote specifically a crafter of nuanced Twitter threads. And we're actually going to go back to this whole Twitter thread thing, because I want to talk about that a little bit more, because that's what kind of started this episode, that planted the seed in this head. But before we do that, we have 2 other people. The next one, Safia, I'm so happy that we got to meet, and that Ahmed introduced me to you, because I think like your perspective is something that has been really missing in the TTRPG space in general. I don't even say this for Asians Represent. I think I love how vocal you are, and I love how dedicated you are to your community. So much so that you're the founder of the Crossroads Guild, a community of tabletop RPG enthusiasts based in Eastern Province, Saudi Arabia. You've just started DMing. You and I were talking about doing your first ever streamed actual play was with Izza and Satine Phoenix and a whole bunch of other amazing people. I did not know that was your first ever one.
Ever.
That is incredible.
And she was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's helped a lot with my nerves. Thank you so much.
We had a little meet up beforehand to be like, how should we play our characters off each other?
Right? And speaking of the best.
Shut up.
Might I say the best, I'll say it, the best photographer in the TTRPG space
No.
I looked at your socials. I've seen your work. I think you're great. I'll say it. Best photographer in the TTRPG space, streamer, voice actor, and recent contributor to the latest issue of Warlock. Get issue 28. It's on the Ravenfolk by Kobold Press. KP, welcome to Asians Represent.
Hello. You're too good. I will say, okay, I will take good photographer and a known photographer in the TTRPG space. I cannot take best photographer.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
What if we make an amendment then? You are one of the elite photographers in the TTRPG space. How about that?
I will. It's your show, so I will let you label me as you wish.
Like for me, I think it's important to really uplift your friends and tell them that they're awesome. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'll do with every episode of Asians Represent. So I had mentioned earlier that, Izza, the evilest and cleverest dog, is a crafter of nuanced Twitter threads. Now, back in May of this year, specifically May 25th, at apparently 5:30 a.m., which would be my time.
Yeah, not my time.
It's just like,
I'm gonna tweet this.
I mean, sometimes, yeah, but not this
You
time.
have those early morning thoughts.
That early morning, in this case, particularly this early morning rage at the gaming industry. And you put out a thread about character design by white Westerners, or I would say tropes in character design that's centered around this sort of Orientalist idea of the exotic belly dancer.
Yes.
You posted 3 examples. You posted Breath of the Wild, Octopath Traveler, Fire Emblem, and Final Fantasy. I forget which one because I'm not really into Final Fantasy. I'm sorry.
I think it was from Final Fantasy 14, which I actually haven't.
Is that the
played.
is that the MMO?
The MMO, yeah.
Okay, I tried it. I couldn't get into it. But you posted this thread talking about how you said 2 really important things. The one thing that I got was how there are certain visual indicators of an exotic East or an exotic West Asia that are always included in a game. And I actually recently started playing Octopath Traveler on my phone. Because you could do it through like Xbox Game Pass through like the cloud. Okay. And I've been like playing it, and I was like, there are a couple things that I dislike about the game. One is, the idea of this support character who's like a belly dancer, and that it's her. That is the mark of her being exotic.
Yeah. And the way the sort of setting is structured around that as well, which we can talk about.
And her entire story, her entire story arc as well. And it got me thinking. But you also mentioned one thing. You're like, yeah, these games are designed by Asian people too. But that doesn't mean that these tropes, specifically this belly dancer one that you kind of focused on, that these tropes still can't be harmful, because Asian people and everyone is still capable of perpetuating harmful stereotypes. Yeah. Right. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today with you folks. I wanted to talk about this idea of how visual elements are very much a means of perpetuating Orientalist stereotypes, and not just words. And before we dive into that, we should probably go over what Orientalism is in general. So in 1978, Edward Said published this book, Orientalism. And he established the eponymous term as a concept used to describe the West's, or Western media's, common portrayal of the East. Now, there's nuance to it, and by West we also include Europe, right? And we include North America. And since the late 1970s, the definition has certainly changed, right? And it's kind of evolved into what is very much loosely a critique on ways of knowing, while comparing the East to the West. And it's a concept now where power is central to the conversation because it relies on giving Western audiences and Western consumers of media the ability to interact with the exotic East or the exotic Asia from a position of power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Now, we have a couple of topics on the docket, and I wonder, Izza, since your Twitter thread was kind of like the nexus for all of this, where did you want to start?
Since you already brought it up, I think it's quite important to start with that idea of the belly dancer.
Yeah.
The visual design of the belly dancer attire and where it comes from. Because you said that, you know, visual design can also be a part of Orientalism. But actually, I think it's a huge component of perpetuating Orientalism. Orientalist art paintings, for example, done by European painters who visited like the Middle East and Cairo in particular in that time, were the one singular lens through which Europeans perceived a lot of that part of the world. And those paintings were done using European painting techniques and tropes, which colored the way in which those painters then presented that part of the world and basically presented them for a European audience, not to accurately portray those people and their culture and their architecture and clothing and so on. And what I would refer to as the belly dancer, sort of in my mind is emblematic of that concept of like visual Orientalism. Many of the like visual design tropes that we associate with evoking, I guess what we call like SWANA cultures, are steeped in Orientalism and were based on those Orientalist paintings of that region, which were produced for the white audience. And the problem with this means that when non-SWANA people attempt to depict that part of the world, or people and their clothing from that part of the world, they're not usually drawing on actual visual research of clothing from that region, but on the white people's Orientalist interpretations of it and recycling those problematic designs over and over again. And the touchstone for those tropes is the turn of the century belly dancer attire, called the bedler. And that is, for those that don't know, the sort of fitted bralette and hip belt with a skirt or harem pants with like dangling beads or coins or tassels. And it's very sexualized. It's depicted in tons of different media, from like James Bond movies to JRPGs. And it has become basically like the singular reference point for depicting women from that part of the world, and specifically in sexualizing them as well. And this is important because the bedler, as we know it, isn't actually from the SWANA region. It actually owes its creation pretty much specifically to the 19th century Orientalist painters, and then European stage productions, like opera, vaudeville, burlesque, as well as early 20th century Hollywood films, rather than to authentic Middle Eastern dress in most ways. And so this attire was created in the West as a fantasy costume that was a visual shorthand for the exotic woman. In particular, in stage productions, it was often used to depict operatic characters like Salome and Scheherazade on European stages. And then because of the popularity of that, it ended up being imported back to the Middle East and North Africa, especially to Egypt, where dancers in those countries adopted the attire to appeal to Western tourists who now expected it. And it was quite common at the time, in particular for men from the UK and France and other parts of Europe to travel to Cairo. It was sort of a big cultural thing at the time. And then it became the uniform of the belly dancer. And prior to this, these dancers wore far less revealing costume during performances. I actually managed to find some visual examples if you want to show those at any point.
Yeah. So which ones? Which one did you want to start with?
I just sort of labeled them as like pre-bedler dancers. There's two images. So you can see, actually there's 3, sorry. So
Which
you can
one?
see,
Do you want to do 1, 2, or 3?
I think any of them, but I think 1 is fine. You can
Perfect.
sort of cycle through them.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see where what we know as the belly dancer attire came from through that, but you can see how different it is and how far less sexualized it is. And if you want to show sort of, there's also sort of images of
Yeah. So
modern belly dancer attire in there as well for a comparison. And then I'm assuming the audience can see through that
they
how
will.
this fed into designs like Princess Jasmine in Disney's Aladdin, which that design, Princess Jasmine, based on the belly dancer attire, has become the basis for a lot of similar looking character designs. We see versions of this character design again and again in Al-Qadim, for example, but it's not limited to designs by white creators, because JRPGs also perpetuate this trope a lot with the dancer character, like we mentioned, Primrose from Octopath and Olivia from Fire Emblem, many Final Fantasy games. So we see this singular design that isn't even originally from the Middle East or North Africa being used again and again as the singular basis for characters, for depicting those characters. And
it's
steeped in
rather
sexualization
lazy.
and Orientalism. Yes.
Yeah, it's rather lazy, and you're basically just kind of repeating the same tropes that I would associate to, say, bra armor or swimsuit armor. It's very similar to that. And although belly dancing is a big part of a lot of cultures, especially part of the Arab world, I mean, many of us here have seen belly dancers. You always have a friend that in a party can just take a scarf, tie it up, and immediately belly dance just on the spot. But that doesn't mean that it's that the clothing of the belly dancer, to Iz's point, is a representation of any of the culture at all. And just having a character that is designed to be other and then immediately sexualized is just very problematic in its own form. And you can you can represent belly dancers. That's perfectly fine, but what are they? Are they kind of that background part that just shows the setting because you're in a situation that might show that? Or is this how you're portraying an entire culture through a character that is joining a game or being part to represent another world that you're not showing? That's especially when it's most problematic. You're not showing that part of the world, this character's introduction to it, and they're immediately just sexualized and dressing in a situation where I think you'd have clothes on if you're fighting people, but then they're dressing into the belly dancing clothing.
Like that concept of like basically, because it just makes it sound like especially in games where everybody's now just dressed that way. It's not just a special occasion. It's not just a specific scenario or situation. It's now, hey, this is the clothing of everybody, and you're like, no. And like, and it kind of also goes back to how like they just paint an entire region with one paintbrush, because even like just looking up, because I was trying to look up Indian dance attire, right? Just traditional Indian. All I typed in was Indian dance, and like 90% of the images were belly dancers or like the belly dancer attire, and not at all any of the traditional like saris and like traditional dance attire that normally is worn.
And traditional Indian dance attire is so cool.
Yeah, but actually,
beautiful. It's beautiful.
If the audience were to look up a word to find traditional Indian dance attire, where would they start?
Oh boy, because then you have to really, because the thing is, there's according to the institution that gives these certifications, I forget the name of it, in India. I think according to them, they have identified 12 traditional styles of Indian dancing, depending on the region. So based off of the style of dancing you're doing, your attire changes. They're all saris, but the way you dress, the way you put it on, and then even within that, depending on what, because Indian dancing or Indian traditional dancing is a form of storytelling, when you're on stage, you are performing an actual story through dance. It's kind of like, I guess you could call it interpretive dance. I guess you have musicians, instrumentalists, you have vocalists. The vocalist is actually vocalizing the story through song, and then the dancer is visually representing it. And so based off of that, depending on the character or the scenario, the attire will change. So within a single performance for a single single dance style, you have multiple outfits depending on what you want to do. So it's really tough to just kind of distill it down to a single word. The best thing I can possibly say is look up a single dance
I'm
style.
already down. I'm already down a rabbit hole. Like that's my face is just like.
So like the one thing I could suggest is look up what the art style or the dance style is. So like one of the prominent ones most people know is Bharatanatyam or Kuchipudi, right? So you look up that dance, and then immediately you will start more specifically seeing what the traditional attire for that would be. Kathak is another one. Oh man, like
I'm looking at I think that's the right one. Is Kathakali?
Kathakali, is that the one where you see
I'm
the
like
green
my
face
mind is
person?
blown by these.
So like,
Never seen anything like this.
Yeah, and then the thing, there's this. Oh man, I'm hoping I can. It's not translated. I'll have to find the clip. But there was a movie called Sagar Sangam that came out in the 80s, and the entire premise of the movie is this character, the main actor, who is just enamored with traditional dance styles, and he wants to learn every single dance style because in his mind he wants to create that one Indian dance, like, because Sagar Sangam means all rivers go into the sea. So the way it's supposed to represent is that these individual rivers are the different dance styles, and they're all going into one ocean, which is supposed to be the quintessential style of Indian style, right? And then there's this one clip where an arrogant dancer thinks she knows what she's doing, and she's a young dancer, and he kind of at this point is kind of washed up. He kind of quit and he became an alcoholic. But there's this one scene where he's like, "You're just alcoholic. What do you know?" And he does the same portion of the song, but in different art styles, and you can tell visually each one is so distinct and different. He even changes up his posture, and then so it's really hard to distill it down to any one thing like that, and that's what you're talking about.
And
like
that's kind of the point.
That's the
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what's a starting point? You said, okay, just you look up costume. You said like major styles of classical dance. That's what I found, and I was like, oh my god, there's so much variety.
Yeah.
So like when you just think, or Indian, and then you just paint it as this one belly on dancer style, which is not even the actual style, and it's just a sexualized Western version of it. Then you just start going, okay. And then the worst part, and I love the fact that you guys touched on this, is that it gets fed back into the original culture, and then for the sake of bringing in tourists and bringing in money, now they have to adopt that. And then when you try to combat it, now they're like, well, no, I saw them wear that. What are you talking about? No, that's what they were wearing in the country that I went to. So why are you saying this now?
Yeah.
And it just becomes this level of denialism and just gaslighting.
Yeah. And then when many games and films want to depict that part of the world, that is the first piece of imagery that gets put forward.
Yeah.
It's either that or it's, a woman covered head to toe. Those are the two extremes.
Yeah. Yes.
But more often than not, it will be the belly dancer, because that part of the world is usually depicted for the pleasure and titillation of white male viewers, presumed white male viewers. So in films, for example, I know we've talked about games a lot.
Let's talk about films.
But
Let's do it.
In film, the idea of the kind of the belly dancer entering the scene, which we see a lot in, like I said earlier, like James Bond films, for example. It's usually for the purpose of signaling to the audience how strange and exotic this place the characters have found themselves in is. And they do that by introducing the belly dancer, who's usually played by a white actress, to immediately signal like, hey, well, the women here are subjugated because this is a strange and exotic land, but you still get to watch the dance.
Yeah.
And she'll dance
Yeah.
around with her
Yeah.
veil, and the audience gets to be
Yes.
titillated and judge that part of the world, but it's made entirely for the white Western audience, and that attire was literally designed for a white Western audience and not from that part of the world.
Yeah. I did upload a photo of belly dancers as part of a ensemble performance for a cinema festival that was in Egypt.
I just pulled it up.
Yeah, so that is actually what they would wear if they're performing in an actual setting on a stage. This was part of a big film festival in Egypt, and it's very different. This
I
is
found it.
this is very recent, and it's very different than what is actually depicted.
Exactly. And
That's
funny enough, you
really cool.
mentioned movies and the movie industry, because in Bollywood, if you go back in time for like in the 60s, 70s, maybe even further back, so like because a lot of Indian culture has been, especially North Indian culture, has been influenced by Mughal Empire and from Middle Eastern influences, because we've been conquered multiple times from that area. And so a lot of North Indian styles of North Indian dances, culture is based off a little bit off of that mixture between Middle Eastern and Indian. And there's a movie, and a lot of these movies that try to portray traditional, like what's the word I'm looking for, periodic pieces. For example, there's one called Mughal Azim, which is basically our Romeo Juliet story. It was a milestone. It's like a water break sort of a film that came out, this huge epic where a lot of current Indian films take influence from. And in that movie, there's basically the story is of a king or a prince falling in love with a dancer, and this forbidden love between them, right? But in that movie, they are not depicted as sexualized being, and it actually looks like what a lot of the properly traditional styles should look like. But then you already then start seeing in the more modern film industry, anytime a belly dancer is trying to be depicted, now you see a lot more of this westernized style, the sexualized style, because it fed back into it. And a lot of Bollywood is about catering to not just the Indian audience, but it's Western influenced. It's why if you because Bollywood is just a single region of Indian film industry. You have every region in India has its own film industry, and Bollywood is just the most Western facing one. So you see a lot of that Western influence there, and one of this is this change up. That it's a market change up, and I'm glad you guys brought this up, because I didn't have that connection until now. I was like, oh, that makes sense, and now I see it, and it's so weird to see that where now it has transitioned that way. Let me see if I can find the image of the original Mughal Azim movie.
I got the poster,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll post it here so our so the folks watching can kind of see this. It's not what I was expecting.
Beautiful film, very well shot.
So it's a
originally
black and white. Yeah.
Originally black and white, but I think they colorized it. But you can see that like she's supposed to be a dancer and a singer and performer of that influence from that part of the world, but very, very modest, very covered up, but at the same time exuding that feminine beauty. But then you now see how it is now, and you're just like, dear Lord.
There's this like stark contrast between
Yes.
that character and the what you saw, like Izza, you put in that folder that we're all looking at, that From Russia with Love picture that you posted from James Bond. It's interesting because I've been thinking about this in the context of video games, and for the most part, especially in like JRPGs, the characters who kind of have this sort of attire, like I want to talk specifically about Olivia from Fire Emblem, are always that support character. They're there to uplift the other characters who in general have that more Western European look. And this is, and I know people are going to be like, well, but Asians made that. I mean, like I said earlier, like
Mhm.
Asians can still be guilty of this, especially because Asian is such a broad term, right?
And because the concept was literally fed back into Asia by
Mhm.
Europeans.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, I looked at this and I'm like, yeah, not only is this, I think you put it really well when you were saying this is a visual shorthand for not only like exotic women, but in JRPGs, in and in general,
Subservient women.
subservient women, exactly.
Yeah. And that's seen very strongly with Primrose and her storyline as well. That, like, I love Octopath Traveler for the gameplay and the music, but boy, do I not enjoy the story
The
in any
story is
respect.
is not good. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Primrose's story specifically is really, I found really jarring when I first started playing it, especially because someone who I know who recommended the game to me had said, I know you're not going to like Primrose's design, but her story is the most interesting. And Primrose's story is very problematic. It starts with her design, and up front, seeing that belly dancer attire, I was like, oof, okay, I'll give it a shot.
it's exactly what you think it is.
Yeah, she is a subservient, light-skinned, I won't say white because it is made in Japan, so presumably all the characters are supposed to be Asian, but it does have a very European medieval feel to it, most of the characters' designs. But that is something that JRPGs draw on a lot. But Primrose specifically is a light-skinned woman in belly dancer attire who is quite literally subjugated to brown men in the place that she comes from. It is the one place in the game where there are dark-skinned people. And it is a desert city that is shown to be somewhere where men are cruel to women, and it is very obviously meant to be somewhere in like West Asia or North Africa, where she and other female dancers are
Oppressed,
forced to dance for the pleasure of men, and there's implied sexual assault potentially.
Yeah, I'll admit, when I played that storyline, I stopped playing Octopath.
And that's fair.
I just put the game down.
I think with Octopath, it was this really strange blend of cultures. Like with Primroses, it was like, oh, I like you immediately, and it's sad that you immediately know what it's going to be. Like you want it to be something more, but it is exactly what you, without any spoilers. So I think Octopath, again, great, very different gameplay for a JRPG, great soundtrack, interesting, like literal visual design, but the character design is like, it's odd because Primrose is like, yeah, she's this subservient, exotic woman. You find her in this desert town where everything is like the sort of like stone cut huts like you would like you see in the films. It's supposed to be like, oh, it's Casablanca. And then your main character is like a European coded character who comes in and helps save this person.
Yeah.
But then
I mean, depending on who you pick as your first character, because you can potentially start as, because you can start as any of the 8 characters. So you can potentially start as Primrose, but if you don't, then yes, it is very much.
And that was my experience, because I started with the warrior character, the knight, who loses his knighthood or whatever. But
so you literally could not have picked the more white saviory character.
I could not have picked the more white saviory one. I was like, I don't know what this is, like warrior. I was like, cool, let's pick this one. I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be this kind of game. Right. I was like, okay, I'll wait until I get a cool archer. And then the archer character, like the hunter.
Yeah, she's the one I started with.
She uses this like Shakespearean English, which I also found to be super jarring because
so I started as her, which meant when I started playing it, I was like, oh god, is everyone in this game going to talk like this? This is really annoying.
But that I found that interesting because I was like, oh, this is the other way in which they're going to make this character different and an outsider. They speak Shakespearean English, and then this one is a belly dancer.
Which is weird because she's like from the woods. You'd think the knight would be the one who'd speak in like the faux Shakespearean dialect or whatever. Yeah. But no, it's the woman who's like the feral forest woman who speaks in that dialect. It's very strange.
It's a strange.
I feel like it might have been like their attempt at saying, oh, this person was not raised in this sort of an environment, so
Exactly.
this was the form of English that they picked up or something.
It's like
Man,
the
like,
high English.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's so weird because like I don't understand why we do this to ourselves, because you know it's like if an Indian gaming company or movie industry made a film based in like China or in like, you know, in Japan, and then depicted all the women wearing really sexy like keep out, not cheap
Like a cheapao is
cheap
the
out. Yeah,
the
that's, I just
outfit.
want to make sure I was saying, but yeah, just like that isn't a first off. I maybe there is one or two, and I cannot presume, but I'm sure that there might be an instance, a very sexy version with that high, like really high slit cut.
Look out for a future episode of Asians Represent on this. There's I will say there is, the cheapao is a very complicated topic to discuss, because in many ways they are form fitting, and they some of them are short, and it's an interesting conversation to have, because people still wear them and very proudly wear them in China. I think the conversation about traditional Chinese clothing is more of a political one, honestly. There's a big, like, TTRPGs aren't really huge in China, but LARP is huge, because there is this movement, and I don't know if you've seen a lot of this. There's this movement called the Hanfu Revival, and it's the revival of traditional, historical-looking Chinese clothing. And people will just wear these in public. Like, I'm going to the store, and they're just going to wear, like, I have a whole set myself, right?
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
It's really cool, but there are problems with it. And a lot of people in China have pointed it out, that the Hanfu revival is very nationalistic, and basically is another way of kind of showing Han superiority and Han Chinese superiority when there are all these other minority groups in Asia. So costuming and wearing traditional clothing and cultural signifiers of traditional culture, it's such a complicated topic. And
then it's like, I think what I was trying to get at is like someone outside of that coming in, and then
you don't
just
see any of that.
Yeah. And then like just presuming that one thing is the thing that everybody wears, that everybody's okay with, and then just like picking that one thing to represent an entire group of people is, I think, like that's what. And then I've you know, just having like or you know, how can I better put this? I think that's the closest I can come to, just like assuming like, or like, you know, every Indian wears a turban. That trope that every Indian wears a turban and has a big ass handlebar mustache, and you know, hey, that's your visual representation of an Indian man.
Yeah.
It's a visual stereotype, right?
And it's a shame, because like when we do this, what ends up happening is that the breadth of traditional clothing and modern clothing that exists in those regions is brushed to the side for the sake of boring tropes that have been used over and over again, if I may say that. It, like Safia said earlier, it's lazy. It's very often used to other as well as sexualize people from that region. And in terms of like for costume and character designers, I really want to see more costume and character designers taking influence from different aspects of clothing from those regions, instead of just the same couple things like the Princess Jasmine belly dancer or the like stereotyped turban, like over and over and over again.
Even
within that,
so
like
rich.
Yeah, exactly. And even within those, you know, categories, there's subcategories. And like I was trying to show, I put in like just the concept of sari, right? Changes based on the occasion. It's just like any form of clothing. There's very casual, everyday saris that you literally wear every single day if you wanted to wear something traditional, versus something a lot more fancy if you were to wear it for a wedding or an event. And even within that, depending on what region you're from, the way you wear the sari, the style you wear, what type. If you're the bride, even like during the wedding ceremony, my wife wore 3 different saris based on the occasion, and that is just being it's just so complex because talks about where you're from, what occasion you're attending, even what, to an extent, what caste you're from, which is a little bit saddening, but it is what it is. There is still that additional nuance, you know.
You want varied representation. So like I just pulled up on screen a picture of a screenshot from Raji, the video game. And
I love that.
right, a fantastic game, and I think like more people need to play it. But what I think is interesting about that game is that is not the kind of clothing that you would expect to see in a video game. Nor are those like the kinds of themes that you would see in like a video game. Like the last time I saw like South Asian coded characters is there's a video game called Smite, and they have like, and it's just like they're overly sexualized, and they do that with all the, even the Chinese ones as well. And it's so odd seeing that, because you look and you see, they have, there's Kali, and then there's Nuwa, who's literally like, how do I describe Nuwa to people who don't know about Chinese mythology? Nuwa is kind of like, Nuwa is the reason why humanity exists.
It's like the mother goddess.
Kind of like the mother goddess. Nuwa is like part snake, part woman, literally like created humanity. There's this big world creating sort of myth, right? But Nuwa is literally depicted as like she's like a woman, and then she's got like silk that just like covers her boobs and then shows her strategically covering up parts. And it's just like, it feels so disrespectful. And then you see, a game like Raji, and it's like, I've never seen clothing like that before in a video game that's like coded South Asian.
Yeah. And
can I just say one thing about that game, why I loved it so much? Because I did a live stream of it. If anybody's ever interested in watching a 10-hour stream of this, but I played it from start to finish
on your YouTube channel.
It's not. Don't worry about it. It's just a video.
I watched
but the thing is, like, the reason I gushed about it so much is because as an Indian, I instantly, based on the clothing, picked up where she was from, what kind of character she was based on her social status and profession and so on and so forth, her age, because that style of clothing is worn by a younger girl. It's not something that an older woman generally wears, because then the style changes. Even if they wore something similar, the style would change. So just visually looking at that, I could instantly pick up that she's from Rajasthan or North India, at least. That the fact that because the
what are those arm things?
So they're a type of bangles. They're a type of jewelry worn very specifically by I'm blanking actually somehow. What's the name of the group that wears the bangles all on their arm? They're basically like the nomadic, some of the nomadic culture in India, similar to Lambadi, the Lambadi folks. Yeah, they're like the tribal folks who kind of are very much. Unfortunately, they're also, I guess, and I don't know if this is the appropriate way to say this, but more of our like, and it's not even
like the Romani.
Like the Romani, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Not gypsy. Kind of like our Romani type folk who, are kind of ostracized, but they're also like the performers, and they are a very specific caste or group of people. And so you look at that and that is that culture. They're from that culture and represent.
And Raji is like a circus acrobat or something, isn't she? Yeah. It makes perfect sense.
So. And that's all the nuances that clothes can really represent if you do a lot of research well. The same can be applied on just about really any culture. Like we have the traditional clothing that women wear, jalabiyat, and there's very specific coloring and geometry pattern and everything that you can tell where that person's from. We have that is present in pretty much every culture, Asian or not, and you miss all of that, and it's a really missed opportunity for creative costuming and design, because the designers that work on these games are talented. It's just, if you spend more time on the research of it rather than just repeat the same tropes, it can create all this value. we actually had a new we have a very one of our very first anime movies that was made in Saudi, and it was made in collaboration with a studio in Japan. So it was a collaboration between Japan and Saudi to create this anime movie, and they were so focused on getting the clothing so perfectly correct in every single way that when they found that there was a struggle to explain the clothing and the material to some of the designers that were based in Japan who are trying to depict this Arab clothing, they actually sent all of the fabric and the clothing and designed it and sent it over to Japan so that they could better depict it in the anime. The anime is called
cool.
it's called The Journey, and it came out earlier this year, and it's just a really good example of a collaboration between two very different countries, and it was actually voiced in both Arabic as well as Japanese and shown in both countries, so it was really
Ooh.
really nice combined
I wanna check that
effort.
out.
I want to check that
I
out.
wanna check
That
that out
sounds
too.
awesame.
And I feel
Yeah.
like when you give that level of respect and effort to research, the level of storytelling that you can then give, just because you're not just one, like it's multi-layered. It's so much more rich, I feel. Even if
Mhm.
it's not like delved specifically into, just having those visual representations done right lends itself to so much more curiosity in people, where they're like, oh, you don't even have to explain it, but the fact that it's there increases the curiosity in people to want to then explore and then find
Yeah.
out and then go, oh, that the reason why they selected that in that very specific scene is because of this. Now I understand more. Now the media makes more sense to me, or has more meaning to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
fundamentally,
film,
like, oh, sorry.
so I was just going to say, like, film does this all the time, where we have just visual cues layered and it's not explained, but it's there, and then when you really want to study it, that's when you learn more about it, and you're like, wow, so that was the reason why this was depicted the way it was depicted, right? It doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be there.
Yeah. Speaking of
Yeah,
just
like,
oh no, sorry, go ahead, Isa.
yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, speaking as a costume designer, like, fundamentally, costume design is a tool for telling a visual story with your characters, for giving the audience information about your characters. So when all SWANA characters are depicted using the same handful of Orientalist tropes, that's the only story that gets told with them. And by and large, we still haven't really moved beyond the belly dancer attire for the most part. There are positive examples, but in the culture at large, we haven't really moved past that. And exactly what KP was talking about earlier, with how he could look at Raji and instantly tell where her character was from and things about her character from the clothing she was wearing. That's what costume design is supposed to do. So we're limiting ourselves and the stories we can tell to our audience when we rest on the same handful of tropes over and over again.
Yeah, we're talking about like clothing is. I think one of the takeaways here is like clothing is very much a complex language that not only tells someone where this outfit is from or where this character is from, but also their beliefs, their social status, their family. Like there's so much to be said through clothing alone. But I wanted to pose this question to you folks, and I feel like this is like a really good like latter sort of third of the episode. Is clothing the only way of communicating characters from these regions? So one character that I really want to talk about is because Isa and I have been talking about this character on Discord, is Kamala Khan.
Yes.
I want to talk about Kamala Khan because Kamala Khan is not only like a super groundbreaking character in the comics, but Kamala Khan is not only getting a TV show, but is also going to be in the next movie, The Marvels. And one thing that I think is really cool about Kamala Khan, as somebody who just started reading her comics, is her character, to me, does not rely on the stereotypes that we see of this part of the world and these cultures. She's very much a character of the diaspora, and that is something that she kind of struggles with. But what I wanted to point out with Kamala Khan is that like this is a cool way of not only highlighting these parts, these cultural elements through what she does and her story, and not only through her costume. Because talking about South Asia, talking about West Asia, talking about like North Africa, and even talking about like East Asia, like China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia, and all of those countries, we don't have to lean on the samurai, the kung fu master, the belly dancer, the
Yeah.
assassin, the genie. We don't have to lean on these things to actually talk about these cultures. We see films and media properties like, Kamala Khan, like Ms. Marvel, who touch on these cultural experiences without this over reliance on the visual side of it, right? The story, the nuance, the things that the characters do. We see this with movies like there is a movie coming out that I'm very excited about called Blue Bayou. It's an independent film by Justin Chon. I think audiences might know him as Eric Yorkie from Twilight, the only Asian in Twilight. But he has kind of gone from being this, like, he does comedic roles to being this independent filmmaker, and he has made movies about the Korean American experience, his experiences. He made a movie called Gook about violence against Koreans in the 90s, about two Korean brothers who open up a shoe store in California.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And then he's got his new movie coming out called Blue Bayou, where, first of all, his character is married to Alicia Vikander. Like she played Lara Croft in the most recent Tomb Raider reboot.
Okay.
But it's an Asian guy married to a white woman, which you don't see in film. And it's a movie about this guy who was brought over to North America after the Korean War as an adoptive child, but has a status where he can face deportation at any time, even though he was adopted and brought to America. And that's what the movie's about. And so it's about that Korean American experience and how he is an American, but he is not treated as one. But it doesn't rely on, him wearing Korean clothing. It doesn't rely on these sort of cultural costumes or cultural signifiers in fashion. So I want to know your take on this, right? Like, obviously, like, we want more nuanced stories. Not only do we want nuance in the types of clothing that we see, because that's what we've talked about for the last like hour or so, but I think we also need to call for nuance in the stories being told through dialogue and through character interactions and through the variety of stories, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely every aspect of it we deserve to see better, definitely. It's interesting that you brought this up for Miss Marvel, though, because I actually have a lot of thoughts about Miss Marvel's costume design.
I want to hear it because see, for me, I don't understand the costume, and so I want to know more. That's why I brought it up.
So I don't want to drag it on for too long, but basically, so at the moment I'm currently writing a script for a video specifically about Miss Marvel's costume and character design, both in the comics and the series / presumably in the movie as well, and about how basically I feel like it is a positive example of utilizing and iterating upon elements of cultural clothing to portray a character on screen, and how specifically it is an amalgamation of aspects of South Asian clothing and superhero iconography. Like, there's a comparison to be made with Superman's iconic costume with Miss Marvel's costume. They have a lot of the same elements, but Miss Marvel's reads distinctly as South Asian for numerous reasons, like the cut of the clothing and what it's based on, the fact that it's based on like a burkini, for example, and it literally takes the South Asian elements and the iconic superhero costume elements and mashes them together in a really interesting way to tell you this is a South Asian superhero. But Miss Marvel is also hugely popular. Like, her costume is the costume design is amazing. Like, there's a reason why they haven't changed it a lot, and whenever they have changed it, they've changed it back almost immediately, because it's good costume design. But the other aspect of Miss Marvel that has made her so popular is the amazing writing behind the character, and how endearing and relatable she is, regardless of who you are. Like, I immediately related to the character because it was a way for me to explore my South Asian heritage, which I grew up quite cut off from, through the lens of a character who was also exploring what that meant to her, even though she was more connected to her culture than I was when I was young. And so it for me, it was like a way to explore that aspect of myself through a character who also was struggling with, like, okay, but how can I, she's American, but how can I be a Pakistani American? And like those kinds of things that people who, same in the UK as well, like people who are part of the diaspora struggle with. But also the character is just like so endearing, but they weave aspects of her Muslim and Pakistani upbringing into casual conversations she has with her friends and with her family, and even with other superheroes. It becomes just like it's a natural part of her life, and that is a good way to portray that in both a like overt and covert way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and character is definitely a whole thing that you write out, and clothing is one element of it. And how you wear clothes is how you interact with the current situation you're in. Realistically, your clothing changes based on where you are. So, for instance, a character that isn't in their homeland, why would they be wearing their own traditional garb, and why not wear something that might be more local? What does that say? Like, there's a meaning behind that, and it can be explored. If a character is dressed in their own traditional clothing, is that their way of representing their pride? If they're supposed to be more covert and hidden, they wouldn't wear their own clothing. So you have they would dress appropriately for the setting, and that says a lot about them. And when you design a costume in that way, you're going to have to think of that. So obviously, with Miss Marvel, she's still dressed like a superhero. It wouldn't make sense for her to, being one of an Asian heritage, to just be the one that doesn't really quite have a superhero outfit. She does. It's just it gives nods and design in a way that shows it. But in the end, you look at it, your first thought is that's a superhero's outfit, and that didn't change for her. So it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's based on what the setting is and what they're doing right now and how they're interacting with the world. So it's just one aspect that can change depending on what you're writing and what you're depicting and what you're showing. And that change shows a lot.
And for Kamala as well, in the comics, you see very often her wearing like a lot of different outfits. She wears the kind of clothing that a lot of like generally American teenagers would wear. You see her wearing like jeans and jackets and stuff, but you also see her wearing like salwar kameez when she goes to mosque and stuff like that. And sometimes like sort of throwing on a scarf over like jeans and a t-shirt. So mixing those cultural elements in, which is something that I remember like a lot of the Muslim girls at my school did, for example. But also another interesting part of like costuming in the comics is when she first, yes, I had the book right here. When she first discovers her superpowers, the initial costume that she creates for herself, which is part of her like shape-shifting ability, is she ends up looking like Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel before she became Captain Marvel, which is quite a sexy superhero suit. And part of that first issue, or I think it's actually the second issue, is like her figuring out that she idolizes this person, but that doesn't mean that she has to try and look like her. She doesn't have to try and look like a white blonde woman in order to be a superhero. And then she ends up with this outfit after that, which I think is a really interesting way for them to introduce her as a superhero as well.
And tells a lot about
tells
who
a
she
story
is,
with costume.
who she is as a person, where she comes from. And I just wanted to say, like, we've been talking about all these nuances, but you won't be able to get that if you don't actually approach the people. and actually involve them in every single level. And that, obviously this is this is the entire reason for this podcast too, is as Asian represents, having that representation, having people at every level as writers, as storytellers, as costume designers, and actually involving them in that process. Like we have that image, like if you like in the folder we were looking at, like all these images of depictions of like the Prince of Persia live action, right?
Oh yeah, I put that there.
Every single person is a white person in that film depicting a Middle Eastern culture, which already is very jarring. And because of you're involving people who are not from that culture, who don't know anything about it, you then continue to push out the same generic ideas of that culture because it's going through this one particular lens every single time. And without actually involving those people, you're not going to know that these nuances exist. You're not going to know that, hey, based on this situation, this is what would be the appropriate attire. This would be the appropriate costume. Or maybe if you do want to modify it, this would be the way I would see that character modifying it based on the situation. Just like how Isa had mentioned, Miss Marvel, she changed her attire. Initially, she tried it this way and then was like, no, this is not who I am as a person. And then even then, it's still a superhero version of that outfit, which I don't think a Western or a white person doing this would have had picked up on, and would have made probably another Carol Danvers, or like that first iteration would have continued.
I think the original character designer was Jamie McKelvey, who is a white dude, but crucially, G. Willow Wilson, who wrote the first volumes, is Muslim. She's a convert, but she's Muslim. And Sana Amanat, who's I believe a producer or something at Marvel, was consulting the entire time. So the two artists, Jamie McKelvey and Adrian Alfona, and G. Willow Wilson and Sana Amanat worked together. I believe, from reading articles at the time that I remember, worked very closely together to create a character that felt authentic and also new and creative and something we hadn't seen before, and to make sure that the cultural elements were done in a way that was respectful but also interesting. So it's possible that when you work together with people from that culture to make sure that you are depicting those things accurately.
I mean, we're already seeing that, and so we could compare two big East Asian movies. The first one was 20.
Oh, sorry, my internet just cut out.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
My first example is 2020's Mulan. God, that movie fucking sucked. It's so bad, but it's a very good example of how having an Asian cast does not mean your Asian story is going to be good if they are not involved. Right? You have a white director, a white costume designer.
Yep. Same for
Europe,
Aladdin.
And same for Aladdin. Guy Ritchie directed that movie. Why?
Who gave that movie to Guy Ritchie? Of all the directors in the world, why was it
why Guy
even
Ritchie?
of the white dude directors, why was it him?
Why will I mean, I get why they cast Will Smith, because it brings the money. But
there is also a vague tradition in UK pantomime and theatre of casting the genie as a black man, which I strongly dislike, because the genie is literally a slave.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, pantomime is a whole other side of this.
I didn't even think about that.
But obviously Will Smith is a big name and a big draw, but I feel like that was drawing on that sort of theatrical tradition of casting a black man to play the genie. Which has its own discomforts that comes with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another example where you can't just, in hiring an Asian actor, it doesn't automatically make it work, is Shadow and Bone.
Yes.
So from my understanding, the original books, the main character is not even Asian. And so they took that same story and just decided to make the TV show, cast an Asian lead actress, and make her from that Asian part of the world, and that's it. That's the amount of editing that they did to incorporate an Asian character in it. And so that ended up feeling rather empty. And if anything, they just wanted... it just felt like there was this show of forced racism, but without actually exploring why are they racist towards each other, and there's no connection with her and her views towards her heritage, any of these things. And even though she grew up very disconnected and not knowing anything about her culture, when she meets someone from her culture, there, or from her background rather, that, let's say, because she didn't grow up with there was no interest, there was no questions, there was nothing. So it
That
felt
actually-
very flat.
That actually touches on both with Mulan and Shadow and Bone and Aladdin, touches on another thing of when you have talent front of camera but not behind the camera, and generally this happens with people of color, it's not just Asians, but there's a Black British historian called David Olusoga who does a very interesting show called A House Through Time that everyone should watch because it's a really interesting way of exploring history from the bottom up instead of the top down through like ordinary people. But yeah, he gave a speech, I think it was like for like Edinburgh Award or something last year, where he talked about how one of the main problems we now face in like the British television industry is with putting women and people of color front of camera but not having them contribute behind the scenes, so that you're still telling stereotyped stories but you're just sort of using those people in order to be able to tell those stories that give the white creatives like they get sort of lauded for telling these stories. And that's something that has happened for a long, long time, not just in British television, but for example, with the kinds of movies that win Oscars, like Memoirs of a Geisha and Slumdog Millionaire, these stories set in Asia with Asian actors, but the white creatives are the ones who win awards, and they are usually films where the majority of the creative team is white, and they win a ton of awards, but the actors do not win awards.
This is why I think this is why Chloe Zhao is such a big deal. Because anyways, sorry, KP, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say I hate Slumdog. Not I hate. I'm absolutely. It is such a lackluster film for me, and I still do not understand why it won the level of what's the word I'm looking for? Acclaim that it had, and because all it did, it showcased the sorrows of my country for the Western audience in a way that wasn't even like as accurate. And the thing is, like, it just felt like a subpar movie to me. It was like, okay, it was a movie. They just for the sake of, hey, this might be something Bollywood. There's a dance sequence at the end. Everybody's dancing. And the thing is, people don't realize that even just like from Bollywood and from all the various industries in India, we're getting so much more sophisticated movies that are much more emotionally diverse and delve into real issues of India that you never will see because no one wants to push it out there. I think now it's starting to change up a little bit, but it's not really a big shift yet. So now anytime anybody brings up, oh yeah, I watched an Indian film, and they say it's Slumdog Millionaire, I'm just like, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
I don't think, like, over here we didn't consider Slumdog Millionaire an Indian movie.
It's not. It isn't.
We did it. Like, and Bollywood movies are very popular here. It is to a point that you even have like Bollywood parties to go sit together and watch the movie, and it's a huge part of the culture as well. And we even in our cinemas have Bollywood movies. So Slumdog Millionaire was always just like it wasn't. It was
a thing.
Because like
I think. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, when I've been talking to, like, so I don't know if you know Nomadic. So I've been, let him watch a movie, like a Bollywood, when I hung out with him. With Trooper, I watched another movie. So like, there's a movie called Lagan, which is an absolutely, it's a long movie. It's a 3-hour, 40-minute film. It's on Netflix, but the entire movie is about the British rule during like late 18th century and how like the struggles of the ordinary farmer against this oppressive rule. And Lagan means tax, and how they're just trying to survive under this oppressive tax. So there's that. There's another film called Tare Zameen Par, or called or Like Stars on Earth, that talks about learning disability and children with dyslexia. Like there's so many amazing films that tackle so many nuanced themes and topics that, you know, but then it's, you know, in the Western field, all you'll ever see is, hey, look, Bollywood dancing.
Yeah.
Yay.
I think since the topic of this episode was like costume and visual design, I think an important aspect of those films like Slumdog and like Memoirs of a Geisha and stuff to touch on is the Orientalism through visual design in those kinds of movies, which is basically using Asian countries as set dressing. So they get to use all the visual elements like set and locations and costumes and props to create like a visual feast of a movie, which is often an aspect of why those movies do so well and win a lot of awards for costume and production design, as well as direction and cinematography. But they don't get to tell that through the lens of like the people from those countries don't actually get to tell those stories. And in those films, they don't get to be as like necessarily like well-rounded people at the center of the story. So for example, a film like Isle of Dogs, which is visually like amazing, set in Japan, uses from Japan, but distances the audience from the Japanese speaking characters at every turn and makes them feel like foreigners in their own story by having the dogs with American accents played by white actors be like the relatable protagonists. And then you get movies and shows like Blade Runner and Firefly that use aspects of Asian-inspired visual design as well as language to flavor the world, but don't have any characters of any Asian characters of significance in the cast to experience that world through. So it becomes set dressing with little substance behind it.
Yeah, that's such a good. You watch a movie and then you're wowed by how it looks visually, and then when you pause to think about it, what did this setting and culture and location, how did it influence the story? Like you could have packaged it up and put it anywhere else in the world and the same things would have happened, and that just is very shallow. And the way clothing has to have like this back layer behind it that explains it. So rather than just design it in silo and then write in silo, if anything, the writing should filter in, and that's why the characters dress this way, or that's why the setting looks this way. And having that funnel through as you would in normal life is what would give any kind of writing a lot more layers to it, because you don't just have, even when you're designing a house or anything like that, everything is chosen with purpose, and that is a representation of a character, and it's the same thing in any media.
I've been trying to get into watching South Asian movies, and I was watching the action sequences from this series called Bahubali.
Yeah.
What? They're so epic. Like,
I can talk to you about that.
I wanted
that. Oh man, see, and that's the thing. So
it's like not a character that I would have ever seen in like Western media, and then seeing that there, I'm just like, what is happening?
So that movie also. So this goes back to region specific things. That movie came from South in like my part of like that's not Bollywood film. That is
it's not.
Yeah, it's a Tollywood film, which is that's the Telugu industry. So that's my home language. That's my regional language. So it came from there, right? So a lot of cultural influences from that part of the region is very prevalent throughout the film. So even a North Indian person who watched that film might not connect with everything because there's so many different things that they don't know culturally that is very specific to us. So that's one thing. On top of that, like anybody outside who watched that film is like, oh, why are these people so powerful, blah blah blah. But you don't understand, like you then also need to understand the not really religious but like mythology behind why these films exist, because these draw a lot of inspirations from major stories like Mahabharata, which is one of our major epics, where even regular human beings were super powerful, because this was during the time where because man, there's so many nuances and layers I can just go on with
Let's
just
talk.
this one
Let's
film.
do a whole episode on that.
I could do it. I would love to.
Do
But
it.
Bahubali is just an awesome film.
It's a great film.
It's like
It's a fun
I'm
film.
I'm watching it. I'm like, how does he move like this? I don't understand it, but I love everything.
I
that's
feel very
going
left
on.
out, and now I need to watch this
Yes.
film. Which I'm gonna watch.
You
after
do,
this.
you do.
honestly,
Very good.
if I had like if I had seen a movie like that as a kid, I would have just been like, what?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I have no bad things to say about this film. It's like,
I mean, there's corny bits.
There's corny
definitely
bits, but like,
bits
and,
but
you
it's
know,
also just so cool.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they do things in the like the characters like with zero understanding of like the cultural
aspects,
sort of
yeah.
background. The characters just do so much cool shit that is like
Yeah.
I overlook literally everything else. Like,
And you want to know, so Bahubali just literally means like superhuman, like super. So like it's just like super strong, someone who's very strong.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why, because if there's that scene where as a baby he grips his stepmother's hand, and it's like she can't even pull away initially, right? Because how
Mhm,
strong he was, and like when
Yeah.
she realizes that that was the reason she gave him that name, Bahubali.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's where that comes from. So not if you know these small subtle things, and like I was talking about, like, so this delves into the fact that because in Indian mythology and Indian religion, our time is split up into a cycle that has different portions to it, right? Different eras, and called yugas or eras. And so what it is basically each yuga, as it transitions into the next one, you have a reduction in I guess not really divinity, righteousness. So like the good dharma means righteousness, or what, like one's place in the world. You add more chaos and you add more corruption into the world as you transition from each level. And the thing is, in the very first era, human beings lived almost just as long as gods. They were just as powerful. But then once you transition into the next one, now like I think each one is 1/10 of the previous one, and we're now considered in the last yuga. The Kali Yuga is the yuga where basically leads at the end into Armageddon. This is the most corrupt era. Everybody is
so
morally
cool.
ambiguous and so on and so forth. So a lot of these, like, even if you look at a lot of especially South Indian films, when you see even regular heroes, right, who are just regular people, that's the reason why we have these crazy fight scenes where like a hero punches someone and the guy
they could fly through the wall or like punching
Right?
through like doors
Yeah.
and like
Yeah,
defying
so to
like
us-
defying gravity. It's
Yeah, so to us, that because that is what we are hearkening back to the days where the previous yugas where human beings were more righteous, and that was the reason why. Okay, so this hero, because he's more righteous and he is the hero and embodies this, he kind of embodies that previous era of humanity where we were more righteous, and so it draws a lot of allusions from that. But you don't really pick up on a lot of those things if you are not if you're a white director or a Western director trying to direct these sort of films. Like we were talking earlier about Slumdog Millionaire, there's another film called White Tiger that recently came out. I think it came out last year, and I think it's either an Amazon Prime exclusive or a Netflix exclusive. But it's literally the same story about someone from the slums who fought against all odds to become successful at the end. But it is much more grounded, much more realistic, and more gritty and raw, and it really showcases the issues of India a lot better. And it was written, directed, and produced by, I think, Priyanka Chopra. So by a brown.
Priyanka Chopra was in the movie.
She was
and it was written by Raman Bharani.
Yeah,
and it's based on a novel by Aravind Adiga.
Yeah, so all the influences, the people involved in it came from are all brown, are all Indian, and therefore the story that was told is our story. And because it's compared
KP.
as. Say it again.
Oh, did KP cut out for the rest of you?
No.
Oh, cut out for me. No.
Oh no! Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can now.
My internet connection is unstable, so
Oh
Oh
no.
no.
we'll see what is going on. We'll try
Oh,
to
that's
wrap
happened to
up.
me twice in this recording already.
Oh,
Get a good scrub.
all three of you are just
Yeah.
dropping so much knowledge that my internet's like, it's too much.
Yeah, White Tiger was great. I really liked
Yes,
White Tiger.
you've seen it. Yes.
Yes.
So
Gotta
like
watch it.
it's like the Slumdog Millionaire if it actually
Yeah.
was Slumdog Millionaire, like
Yeah,
an
because
actual.
what a surprise! The setting interacts with the world.
Yeah.
Wow, a good story. I'm super happy that people finally know who Tony Leung is.
Right. That is such a
Like-
travesty.
Like people like he alone is a reason to watch that movie.
Is he the dad?
He's the
Yeah.
dad. He is an icon in Hong Kong cinema. Like he has done comedy, action, drama. He's literally done everything. Like in Asia, they call him the man who can speak with his eyes. That's what they call him because he is so good at acting that he just needs to look at you.
Yeah, my brother is a kung fu instructor and watches a lot of like Asian kung fu movies and stuff, and just a lot of like Asian and Chinese movies in general. And I feel like I have seen that man on my family's TV screen a million fucking times. Just like walking past my brother in the living room.
The dude is like, he doesn't age. Like he's immortal. Like
He's like our Amir Khan. Like,
yeah.
so when I say our, like Amir Khan is very similar in the sense. Sorry, go ahead. I can.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, like, similarly, there's an actor named Amir Khan who is a chameleon in terms of acting. He's the movie Lagan that I was mentioning earlier. So that was his movie from 2000. And then he's done so many, and I love his films because each one of them is tackling some sort of a social issue or a very heavy topic. So that movie about dyslexia, the learning disability, he's in that film. He's in a film called Secret Superstar that tackles gender norms and also cultural oppression of women. He did another movie called Three Idiots, which is my favorite film of all time, but that tackles education in India and this idea of like you have to be like a doctor or some profession that is successful, and anything outside of that is unacceptable. What was the other film? PK, the movie called PK, which is about an alien visiting Earth and observing our religion and finding out how organized religion is absolutely terrible. So, all these crazy, but they're all amazing, amazing films that you don't get to see here. And no one knows about here because everybody ever focuses is Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah,
it's interesting because like where I am, I can't say that I'm experiencing a lot of the same things because if we were to watch something of another culture like Korean films, we get Korean films, we get Indian films, we would get quite a lot, and everything else is really just American. So we just see it as that's an American film, this is a Korean film, this is and then within the Middle East, all of the films that might get popular, like an Egyptian film, or now that we have Saudi films, those just pop up and they show up on their own. And I don't think we ever had this blend of confusion between what an American film with a Korean cast is and then what is a Korean film, or the same thing with an Indian one. And there's always been that very clear, obvious disconnection.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Like with if it's from Korea, it's a Korean film. If it's from America, it's an American film. But there's no like Korean American film. It's an interesting way of like approaching how you consume media and what sort of cultures, nationalities, or whatnot you associate with media. And then in your case, it's literally country of origin.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how it happens over here, because I feel like, I mean, maybe it changes depending on where you are, but like I feel as though American movies are still like movies, and then a lot of people will go like, but this movie is a British movie, so it kind of happens the other way around, where like all the other movies are like, well, American movies are like movies, and then you get like the foreign films, quote unquote, that aren't American, and then it's British movies specifically, and we always talk about like bolstering the British film industry and the British television industry and stuff, but we get so much American stuff that like it's just sort of normal to have that, rather than being like, these are American movies, you know.
The British TV industry is so different from North America, so wildly different, and I think in many ways it does some things much better, in that there's a real focus on like short, concise stories. Like this series, 6 episodes. We're not
6 episodes and you're done.
And you're done, and we're not going to drag it on because that's the story. And then here it's like, we're going to do this for 15 seasons because
there's that joke on The Office.
The Office.
Yeah. There's that joke on The Good Place where Tahani's like, oh, this show ran on the BBC for 60 years. They did nearly 12 episodes or something like that. Like,
exactly. You get it, right? You know, The Good Place The Good Place is another cool example of a show that, like, I think is really neat because it's got that representation and it's got all these different stories, and I kind of wanted to kind of segue into this idea of an ensemble Asian cast with different stories, and you know. Prior to this, we were talking about like different directors and, you know, Asian people leading Asian stories, or just Asian people and other people of color being in decision-making roles in the creative process, and not just as on-screen talent, set dressing, extras, or literal sets, as if you mentioned, literal sets. The one that I wanted to talk about was Eternals. I wanted to talk about Eternals because not only does it have a Chinese director, but it has a very, very diverse cast. It's like Gemma Chan. It's got like, I want to specifically talk about my boy Kamala Khan. I want to talk about him specifically because, you know, we were talking about Bollywood, and we were talking about superheroes, and we were talking about Kamala Khan. And one thing that I think is really interesting about the Eternals is that I think not only are you going to get that, not only is it a movie in general that, with a Marvel movie, I should say, that hasn't really, with a story that hasn't really been told, right? Well, it's a story about people who are immortal and have not been acting upon all of the things that have happened in the MCU, right? But what I think is really awesome is that they have a very diverse cast to fill these roles. They're not all like, haha, we're all white immortal people. It's literally like, this person is Asian. There's a Chinese one, there's a Korean one. Like, I think I don't know Kamala Najani's background. What's his background? He's Pakistani.
Yes, he's Pakistani.
And then,
but you know, we were all one country. The culture is very, very similar.
But there are certainly differences. So like for me, it's I never want to like make a generalization about an individual.
Absolutely.
If I could get the answer, right? And I think that's what most people should do. But I think what's super cool about this movie is that not only is it's gonna be a huge hit. I think it's gonna be a huge hit because it's that epic. It's being marketed as that Avengers. Right? It's got this diverse cast. It's got huge stars. Like, it's got like Game of Thrones fans are gonna watch it. Like, Angelina Jolie is one of the leads, and then we have these Asian characters who are filling roles that you might not think would actually be associated with an Asian character, which is why I think it's such an important high-profile Western movie for that reason alone. Because they weren't like, okay, we need this character's Asian, we'll cast an Asian character. Or this character's not Asian, we're not going to put an Asian actor in this role. But they did. And what's cool about Kingo, the character that Kamala's playing, his whole thing is like, I'm immortal. I'm going to be a Bollywood star. That's his character's cover. And he learned how to do Bollywood dance for the movie. And I read that the other day. And I was like, oh, shit, that's what his character's doing in the movie. And then you see it in the trailer. And I was like, oh, this makes sense. But I think what's going to be so great is that because this movie has because Disney is so good at like putting all the ingredients in to make a success, except for Mulan. Um,
And Aladdin.
and Aladdin. God, yeah. I see a trend here. But with this movie, they have all the ingredients for success. But I think the results are going to be something that, most people haven't talked about. And it's that exposure to Bollywood, the exposure
Yeah.
to Asian actors playing roles that aren't necessarily needed an Asian actor.
Yes.
Right?
They're not typecast
exactly
for being like, they're not like, we have this one guy who comes in and does kung fu for a bit. There's your Asian.
There's your
like,
Asian. Yeah, exactly.
We have this belly dancer who comes in for one scene. There's your Asian. Like, it's not that.
They're there and they're playing. They have these nuanced roles that aren't necessarily tied to the actor's Asianness.
Yeah.
I guess Kamal Nanjiani, he's playing a Bollywood star, but there's more to his character in the movie because he's literally immortal. Like, I want to see what else he did. When
I really do hope.
Yeah.
I really do hope that they kind of take it beyond just that aspect. But one thing I also wanted to talk about, and I feel like every Asian faces this, especially Asian males, in the sense of we're never depicted as desirable, right? Until very recently, I mean, where we're either the comedic side characters, we are just typecast as this, mysterious kung fu master, but always in a physically more feeble state or less desirable than the white male lead, or even any other white male character in that role, right? And then to see Kamal Nanjiani go from that very stereotypical nerdy character from Silicon Valley into this, kind of a god, and actually have power and showcase that power. But at the same time, I'm hoping they don't make him into once again, even though he looks like a god, shows him more badass and shows him in that light that it's not just, oh, he's a Bollywood star and that's it. So I'm very interested in this, and I was very excited that he was cast as this character.
So good looking. He's so ripped, but sorry.
But I'm very, very curious.
Daniel's just over here having a crisis.
When the other films that I want to see, and I haven't seen it yet, but I was so glad it was made. I don't know how it was. I don't know how well it was made. And actually, I'm even blanking the name of it right now. But he's the romantic lead in that film.
Oh, the Big Sick?
Big Sick?
The Big Sick.
Well, that's that's
his story.
No,
not that one. That was not that one, which also amazing, and I need to see it. But it's like one of those. This is a popcorn flick in the sense of it's him next to a black female lead, and their romantic interests. Like they're the couple in this film.
A mixed race couple where one of them is white.
Lovebirds.
Lovebirds.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So right. So to see that depiction and see a interracial couple that is not white person with another race, and see that, I'm hoping that there was a level of nuance and have that level of depiction. But then actually seeing him as a romantic lead in a film like this, was just like, whoa, was not expecting it. It is comedy. It is a comedy still, but he was the lead character, and then we have a black lead female character who is not just sexualized, and it shows a genuine love between them from what I saw. Things like that. We're seeing more of those. We're seeing a lot more TV shows that are better representing the the Asian American experiences. Master of None. We have Kim's
I recently watched Never Have I Ever, I think it was called, about the
the Indian girl. So that was the other one. And really watching these movies, or these shows, especially that Never Have I Ever, it's stylized. You're like, but at the same time, you're like, that was part of my experience. I was that kid who was super embarrassed about her culture, about his culture, about where he was from, and hated bringing his food into school, and but it's so fun because now that we are getting this representation and more people talking about it, I was talking to a family friend the other day whose kids are going through school. Like her oldest daughter just entered 6th grade in middle school, and how like because there's so much more representation, she's not embarrassed, and she actually asks for Indian food because her friends are bringing Indian food. I'm like, I didn't have that like growing up. I didn't have
Yeah.
that level of
Yeah.
comfort growing up, and seeing that be okay now makes me very, very hopeful and excited.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was really lucky because when I was growing up, I went to schools where there were a lot of Asian people, and
Yeah.
so like I ate that food all the time. But again,
Like
that's
I would
not.
literally throw my food away and rather have pizza that day because I would get comments like, "Ooh, your food smells. What is that?" I'm like, okay,"
There's
and toss it.
the show Fresh Off the Boat. They literally do a scene in one of the early episodes where they go to buy white people lunches.
I remember that, yeah.
And
Yep.
like that really spoke to people. I mean, Eddie Wong has said that like that show is not his story, but that show is still important because it shows Asian characters in roles that you wouldn't associate with traditional Western media.
Yeah.
We're the main characters. We're just regular people doing regular people things, and we're not
Yeah.
like the Asian geek, and
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
the martial artist. And I think that's why movies like, I think one of the best movies in terms of feeling seen in was Always Be My Maybe.
Ooh.
If you haven't watched it, because it has one trope in it that I hope becomes a character trope in the future, and it's the slacker Asian.
Yeah.
Because you don't see that
Yeah.
because of the model minority myth. And Randall
Mm.
Park's character is literally this slacker stoner who is just trying to find his way in life, and that's
I
something you
feel
don't
like
see.
that is actually becoming, now that you mention it, I feel like that is actually becoming a bit of a trope, almost like to combat the like Asian nerd trope. Like there's that film, there's Josh Chan in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Jason in The Good Place, the sort of not necessarily just slacker, but the sort of like the
Average.
like anti-Asian nerd
Anti-Asian
character.
stereotype, yeah.
Like
wanna
it feels
see
like
more of
they
those.
very deliberately do it like to the opposite direction.
I mean, it's like the
Yeah.
same thing with the Master of None with Aziz Ansari's character, who is just he wants to be an actor, which is very frowned upon. It's so weird
Don't
because
do an accent.
yeah, and don't do an accent, but also just like that expectation from his parents of why are you becoming an actor? Because it's not a typical thing that an Indian American would do. Like their job is to become either a doctor or an engineer, and this is breaking the mold. And then having him so like normalized in that sense and not made other felt so genuine to me because that was my experience growing up in this country.
They did that in the Office, with in season 2, the Diwali episode.
Yeah.
And Mindy Kaling's parents were actually playing her character Kelly's parents in The Office, and they're like, "Why are you dating Ryan? This guy's a doctor." And it's just like, I was like, "Oh, like that's like,
Yeah.
Mindy Kaling wrote that bit. She wrote that bit."
Yeah. No, honestly, with all of this, there's still not that much representation of Arab characters.
Yeah.
A lot of times in Western media, when they show Arab characters, they don't actually even cast Arab actors. They, if they try, they cast an Indian actor.
Yep.
Yeah.
If they try.
Because like the same thing in the first Iron Man film, the main the head of the 10 rings that's depicted in there, the main villain that gets
Jeffrey Irons? No. What's his name?
not Jeff Bridges, but
not
when
Jeff
the
Bridges,
one
no.
like he's the one that kidnaps Tony and sees Tony, and he's like the head of that organization in whatever country, that like Middle Eastern country that Tony's in. That he's an Indian. He was speaking Hindi. Like when he was speaking, he was speaking Hindi. I understood him. I was like, that's Hindi.
Yeah, and then, then you have like you have Lost. They cast and I'm not sure where he's from, but he's a Southeast Asian actor, and the Arabic that they used, he couldn't speak Arabic.
Yeah.
He couldn't. I don't know what he was speaking, but that wasn't really Arabic, and he's meant to be Iraqi, and that was just wrong.
Yeah.
And
to
and
dunk
they
on
won the
Aladdin yet
point.
again, the woman they cast as Jasmine in the live action Aladdin was half Indian, not Arab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On Aladdin, I do really hope that the lead, Mesa, what's his name? The actor who played Aladdin, it's rumored that he's going to be cast as Ezra Bridger in Star Wars,
Oh.
which would make him the first South Asian lead on a Star Wars property, should it happen. And that also means that one of the most prominent South Asian coded Star Wars characters may also come into live action. So the character Mesa Massoud, I think is his name.
Mena Massoud.
Yes,
Mena.
he's. But it's rumored that he's being cast as Ezra Bridger, who's the main character of Star Wars Rebels. That character is not coded as Asian, but they're casting an Asian character potentially to play play him.
That's cool.
Which I think is fucking
That
awesome.
happens.
But there's also a South Asian coded character who breaks so many stereotypes of Star Wars Rebels, and that's Sabine Wren. She's a Mandalorian who wants to be an artist and express herself artistically, and she is voiced by a South Asian actress and is coded as Asian in Star Wars. So I really hope that if they decide to go in this route in like The Mandalorian, I really think we're going to see more Asian representation in media where it's not often seen, right? You know, we started this episode talking about, you know, like Orientalism and visual shorthands, right? Which I think is like probably one of the best ways to put it is and then this conversation transformed into one about, well, what does representation mean beyond these visual indicators? And I think what we've kind of come to is like representation means, you know, in film and RPGs and video games is seeing these characters occupy roles that are not defined by these previous visual shorthands, right? Having a Chinese character not be the kung fu character, or having, you know, like a SWANA character not being the exotic support character belly dancer, or like not having a Muslim character who's not the Prince of Persia or a terrorist or a villain, right? In a film. And I think we're starting to see that in the future with the Marvels, right? With Eternals, with, you know, I mean, Eternals kind of covers what I said too. I'm just really hyped about Eternals. And I think we need to see more of that in RPGs.
Yes.
We're seeing a push for this in TV and film, but we don't see this in RPGs because I feel like RPGs are really stuck in these old sort of genre tropes.
Yes.
And because
it's a big part of the trappings of every fantasy thing being based on Tolkien, where there is literally the trope of like the Easterlings, the people from the East who are brown and bad, and they live over there in the East, and we don't talk about them until they come over with their elephants to kill us. Like when all you do is base your fantasy worlds off of these same handfuls of tropes, and that's not even just the tropes about brown people, it's the Tolkien-based fantasy that D&D and RPGs tend to sit in. It limits us to the roles that people of color got to play in those worlds typically, which was not much. And usually very stereotyped.
And that's
basically anything that is white is right, anything that is brown or any black is just wrong. Like,
we already been going to talk about orcs.
Orcs and drows and you know, it's just that. I think we were having this conversation before the stream about how like the concept of being black was at a time, it's not even about a race, but more of just the lowest rung of, like delegating anybody to the lowest rung of society. Like we were talking about in like the Netherlands, even Turkish people were considered black people or of the black group because that was what was deemed the lowest rung here. And you know, it really just makes it, you know, you're pushing an entire negative concept and making a specific group of people the definition of a negative thing, and that just it speaks so much.
And I think like one of the biggest ways that we can fixes within RPGs is to have more creators of these different regions, and those creators even then have to be wary of what they create, and to look back at where they're gaining inspiration and where it's tracing from, and just by doing that, doing a little bit of due diligence before actually putting pen to paper, or a sketch to design and things like that, you could do so much. It represents so much more, and end up bringing a story that is unique in its own right and has depth of culture and perception that will lead to someone going out and talking about it. I mean, just look how much, at least how much I learned just looking at Raji and you guys explaining what all of this means. And that happened because someone did all of that work and put it in this beautiful package for you to go out and play.
Yeah, and that's why I think in the RPG space, it's important for, you folks to not only be on streams, right? I think it's also important for you to be involved in writing, like KP, right? You're a writer, right? Like I want, and like people doing art, like Izza, you're constantly showing the art that you're working on, and I think like it's really incredible seeing, like, in the year that I've known you, seeing how your skills have just leveled up dramatically. Like since you're doing all this stuff, or like Safia, like literally being on big stages, and like, and representing your community, but also creating hubs through Crossroads Guild for people to connect and feel empowered to tell these stories, right? That's why it's important for folks like us to not just be the cultural consultants to fix or to point out the mistakes that white people make, right? Because they don't have to listen to editors. They don't have to listen to consultants. And oftentimes people use folks like us in the industry as like a stamp, right? I know, Izzy, you've talked about this with streaming as well and things like that, and we don't have to go into that. But like, we're not here to just be like this like stamp of approval or this thing that you can use to say that you're trying to be better, right? Because that just makes us set dressing, right? We are here in the TTRPG space to be your writers, to be your artists, to be your project managers, to be your creative leads, right? To be your designers. Right.
And I also want to like address the people who also then go, oh, well, why does it matter if, as long as you have the best people in those roles? Like, oh, why does it matter as long as you have the best actor? And why do you need to, why is this, why do you have to be such an SJW about this, and so on and so forth? And to those people, I would really want to just let you know, like, it's really, I forget what it's a big fallacy to say that you can't have the best in that group of people. You can still have amazing actors and amazing talent in that, and you don't have to just be like, oh, I'm distilling my search down because now I'm only relegating it to that group of people. No, it's because all you did was now opening up to more options that you never even bothered to consider. That's
that argument implies that we are not equally skilled and talented.
Exactly.
Or that we are not the best, right?
Exactly.
It's a huge cop out. It's a huge cop out to stay in your circles and to not even try because you worry about being challenged in your views. It's a huge cop out.
Exactly. And then the other aspect is also, you're not being genuine, you're not providing a platform or a voice to have these stories then be told in the way that they're supposed to be and meant to be. And I can understand or see, like, the only time I can see having that argument and be okay with it is if it becomes normal to tell these stories accurately with actual care and respect that they deserve from everybody in the industry, and you're not producing content that are very shallow and harmful, like we've discussed, right? When we get to that stage, fine,
then you get to
go ahead, you can maybe, even then, I'll be very wary of you, but we're not there at all.
We've talked about it on Critical Read Alcademe a few times, I think, where we've said, like, maybe also if you are a white creator looking to create something based on like Asian culture or a culture that's not your own, maybe do ask yourself the question, like, why do I want to do this? And am I the person to do this? And if I still want to do this, who am I surrounding myself with when I create this book or this setting or this game or whatever it is? And like, ask yourself really genuinely, be like, why do you want to create a Japanese samurai game? Why do
Yeah.
you want to create another like stereotyped Middle Eastern setting, you know?
Yeah.
How much
No,
of this is
we-
your fetish of
Mm.
that culture?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, no,
and-
we have a lot of the writing projects I work on, I try to introduce my like Arab culture to write in, and we have a writing group where I am that works on these things and works on representation, and it's more local projects, but to represent different parts of Saudi, but we do end up getting wary when an expat, especially like a white expat, joins in, because we've had this issue where they join in and they like, I'm writing a book about the Saudi woman's experience, and I'd like to interview you to write my book. And we're like, why?
Why are you writing this
Why?
book?
Why are you writing this book?
Why are you writing this book? Is it about your experience here? No, it's about the Saudi woman's experience in Saudi.
Mhm.
And it's just very offensive. And we just are not fond of having those kind of people around. And it's almost like they're sitting there wide-eyed, like waiting, and their questions are always very guided. Of they might as well just go out and ask, so how do you feel oppressed?
Yeah.
Yeah. This
That's
weird sort of fetish for like the oppressed woman, and it's very bizarre.
that said, like
Um,
Isa
White
said,
savior mentality of, hey,
Mm.
I'm here to showcase
To
your
protect
story.
you.
I'm
I'm
here to
helping
protect
you.
evil
I'm doing
brown
you a
men.
favor. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
said, if you could get past those questions, if you can get past Isa's line of questions, like, why are you doing this? Do you need to do this? Are you surrounding yourselves with the right people, the
right
best
checks and
people,
balances.
right? If
Yeah.
if you in your heart believe that this is a project and about an Asian culture, and you are not Asian, that you should do, you know what you should do? You should hire these three people who are on this show right now. That said, in order to wrap up, is a designer, master level cosplayer, streamer, crafter of nuanced Twitter threads, and the best Twitter handle on the internet. Where can people find you on the internet? And what have you got going on?
Well, you can find me at my best Twitter handle in the world, Evil Clever Dog. I'm also Evil Clever Dog on Instagram and YouTube. I make videos about cosplay and crafting, but I'm, as I mentioned earlier, looking to expand and make some videos, maybe looking at dissecting like costume design and elements of visual design, because I have been up until COVID primarily a set and costume designer for theatre. But theatre's dead. So yeah, you can find me in those places. And at the moment, what am I working on? Because I've been ill and haven't been streaming a lot, so I haven't
That's
been
okay.
doing a lot related
Your
to
health
that.
comes first. You've got a backlog of YouTube videos that folks should be watching.
I
The
do.
Evil
I'm
Clever
trying to
Dog.
work on new ones, but yeah, editing is slow. But yeah, I'm writing that video about Miss Marvel, and I've been working on my Ares cosplay, so hopefully I'll be able to finish some of my videos for that soon. And yeah, just like check out my various
Yeah, because
cosplay and art things.
you do amazing stuff, and like we talked about this
Thanks.
before as well, like community and getting like putting yourself in a new and different position to tell different stories and taking that step. Safia, where can people find you on the internet? What have you got going on?
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Safia_D. And what I actually just wrapped up and finished, gosh, was it last week, was the first ever Middle East and North Africa tabletop roleplay gaming convention that we had done. And we had different talks and games. There was a localized version of Honey Heist set in historical town Jeddah.
Okay.
There was a campaign launch run by my dear friend Ahmed, where he's launching his version and his playthrough of Zahara, the campaign setting. So that was launched last week, and I think they're out on 3 episodes now. They're streaming, I believe. I forgot which day, but you can find out more
Is that on?
information
Is
on
that
that.
on Ahmed's YouTube channel too?
Yes, it is. So there we also I ran a game for the first time as a DM on Twitch and launched the Crossroads Guild Twitch channel, which will be having more games from my wonderful community. We actually even had an all women's a game panel run by my players and my friends, all of them from the region, and it was just great. We even had a panel in Arabic talking about how to get into tabletop roleplay gaming, mostly as a DM, but also for players. We even had a nice short panel on publishing, where we had some great guests that have fantastic experience in publishing and writing, and it's just been a great effort. And we've had people from all over the MENA region, from Egypt and Emirates and Lebanon and a couple of different places all join in. So it was just wonderful and great. And we even talked about some parts of how to push to have more content locally. And it was just fantastic. And we're hoping to do this annually. So a lot of these can be found on our the YouTube channels as well, and I can link the YouTube what's it called?
Yeah, I'm gonna put all.
Playlist.
I'm taking
Yeah.
notes. I'm putting links to all of this stuff.
I'll send
You
you the
know,
YouTube playlist.
yeah, on our for our patrons, and of course on the YouTube video for this. And last but certainly not least, KP, photographer,
Oh
the
man,
one of the elite photographers of the TTRPG space,
no.
streamer, voice
This has
actor.
big, like,
and
America's Next Top Model vibes, like, noted fashion photographer Nigel
Yeah.
Barker.
And,
Noted cosplay photographer KP.
and of course, let's not forget recent contributor to the latest issue of Warlock, issue 28, on Ravenfolk. You are a published TTRPG writer now. Where can people
I
find
can
you
say
on the
that.
internet and all of your amazing work?
So hi everyone, I'm KP, also known as KP11 Studios on pretty much most of your social medias. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Twitch, I'm on Instagram. I'm mostly a photographer. I do portrait and cosplay photography. I will say I'm good at what I do. I enjoy what I do, and I get to work with really amazing people, which enables me to produce great content. Whoever you are always great, and I always will enjoy working with you. But outside of that, I'm also I play a lot of TTRPG games. I'm currently in a long-term campaign called City of Light and Dark on Friday on Trooper SJP's channel, where it's a fate-based game set in the 1940s in Nazi-occupied France, and we're a bunch of resistance fighters trying to be undercover out there and trying to bring them down to justice. I play a character named Prince Preetham Singh, also known as Dr. Preetham Singh, who I absolutely adore and enjoy his wide-eyed innocence, and I'm constantly scared for because I'm in Nazi Germany and I am. But it's an absolute joy playing him. I also am on Cobalt Souls Into the Southlands campaign, which happens tomorrow every Sunday at 1 p.m. on their channel. I'm a guest player there, and I play a Ravenfolk character named Shani, who is based off of a god of similar name. There's a lot of allusions alluding to said god, and there's a reason why I picked him as the inspiration for it. So if you're ever interested, go check that out as well. I love him, and I try to make sure that any game I play, every character that I do embody, I try to bring in my culture. I play a person of color from my culture that I can just showcase about. Issa knows this because she created the art for one of. Sorry, I'm sorry, Issa. Did I get that? Was it? I forget. I'm so sorry if I missed your pronouns. Was it?
Oh no, she. Yeah.
For some reason, in my brain. Sorry. Yes. So
You're fine.
she made the artwork for that character. I still love it so much. It's like one of my favorite art pieces that I always look at, and I love that character so much. Yeah,
I love
so
her
things
too.
like that. So if you're ever interested in, was that?
I love her too.
I love her so much. And like, if you're ever interested in, bringing me on to your show and want a little bit of that cultural representation, that's what I try to bring, a little bit of that into every game I play. So that's what I do. And as mentioned, I recently helped contribute to the latest issue of Warlock for Cobalt Press. I specifically did the Raven folk and tried to introduce a little bit more of, nuance to their character, and based it off of Indian heritage and what ravens mean in my culture. And so, if any of that interests you, you can go check that out over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I'm at. Right
I'm going to put links to all of this stuff. I've been diligently taking notes. Y'all are awesome. Really, like, I'm so glad that we finally got together to do this episode.
Same.
Yeah.
Let's do it again. Let's
Hell
do it
yeah.
again.
Yeah, I've been hyped for delving into some like costume design analysis for so long.
Yeah,
I'm
this is
so
going
glad
to
we
be
did
one
this,
of one of many costumes, because I would like to do one on like arms and armor. And
Hi.
I've got some connections that I would like to from my museum industry days that I would like to leverage.
Okay.
That's so cool.
It's a work in progress. Actually, like COVID, the pandemic really fucked up my plans. So we're going to do a video series where we were going to literally spend time at museums looking at weapons with curators.
Nice.
So it'll happen. We'll figure it out.
will.
But that
It'll
said,
happen.
I just thank you folks for joining me. I'm glad that we were able to do this remote recording that we can later rebroadcast, because it enables us to include people in different time zones, so that we can make sure that as many perspectives, voices, and experiences are being shared on Asians Represent. So again, Iza, Safia, KP, thank you so much for joining
Thank you,
me.
mate.
Y'all are awesome. All right.
You're awesome.
Awesome.
You're awesome.
Yeah.
Yo, Keanu, he's the best. Oh, I will say this one last thing. Matrix, the new Matrix trailer.
So
Priyanka Chopra's in it, and like,
Cheers!
like what? And
She's supposed to be. I think she's supposed to be the grown-up version of Sati from the little kid.
Yeah.
Okay. I have mixed feelings about the Matrix for
the
obvious
original
reasons.
series. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just like in general.
There are mixed things. For me, it was always like, I've always like Keanu Reeves, like Canadian, Asian heritage, crushing it. Like Matrix is. There are certainly things wrong with it.
Absolutely.
But it's cool to see these opportunities, and it's cool to see these actors getting.
It's cool that
spotlight.
at the very least it looks as though the cast is a little more diverse this time around. I don't know if that will fix the Orientalism problems, but it's good.
Yeah,
at least there's that.
I'm very. It's that sort of post-apocalyptic cyberpunk that I don't think we've talked about a lot on this show, but maybe we will when the movie comes out.
Cyberpunk episode would be
another one. Another
one.
Everyone here loves Keanu Reeves because someone just like decided, oh, his mom's Lebanese.
Yeah, he was born in Lebanon.
He was born in Lebanon, but his mom's not Lebanese.
Yeah, he was. But everybody's just kind of adopted Keanu Reeves. It's like, he's like the most unproblematic person in Hollywood. His grandma's like Chinese, like part Chinese or something, and like he lived in Toronto. That's where I live, and like he went to many schools in Toronto as he was moving around schools. Like, dude's a legend.
He's what you would call the golden retriever of actors.
Yeah. You mentioned that movie, Always Be My Maybe earlier. Is that the one where he has that amazing 2 scenes where he utterly steals the movie for 2 scenes?
So this episode comes out after the Ennies winners are announced, so I don't know if we actually won. But when they ask, you have to submit like a song that will play if you win. And every year I submit I Punched Keanu Reeves from Always Be My Maybe. And this year, Gen Con is happening in person, so the Ennies will happen in person. And if Asians Represent wins Best Podcast, the song, rapped by Randall Park, called I Punched Keanu Reeves in the Face, will play for everyone.
That is hilarious.
So that's what I made that. I picked that last year, and like they didn't do the music because it was all remote. But maybe this year if we win, who knows? Again, this episode comes out after the Ennie, so we'll see. But yeah,
Yeah.
I love Keanu Reeves. Again, this episode comes out after the Ennie, so we'll see. But yeah, and we're back. Ooh, there was a little bit of a audio bleed through there, but Steve,
Yeah.
that was something.
That was one of my favorite episodes,
That-
to be quite honest.
Yeah, that was that was definitely one of my favorite episodes.
I loved how you started that episode and basically went right into it. You're like, okay, let's talk about belly dancers. And like everyone was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And I'm like, well, okay, we're not pulling any punches here. And I learned a heck of a lot. And even being part of Asians Represent and like having these conversations in some respect, even hearing other voices talk about it helps me to form up my own internal structure when it comes to how I'm going to talk about it moving forward. So all these voices, I think they were just so valuable to me as just like a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I the entire time I was listening to this, and even though you could see it on my face, I was just like, what? This is all so new to me. Like,
Yep.
It was like experiencing it all over again. And I was, taking notes, and I just posted all of the notes on our Patreon. And that's actually a good thing to segue into, because we owe a lot to our patrons for this show, being able to do this. Yeah, that was just so good. And, related to that last bit, I kind of kept that in there because I put this all together before the Ennies. And as you informed me, Steve, they did not play the I Punched Keanu Reeves song.
Which, I mean, their loss.
Mhm.
Truly, it's their loss.
Yeah. I will say, like, I'm so happy that we're doing these pre-recorded episodes, simply because, like, we do this live. Like, you and I are live on a Friday evening in Toronto. But the problem is that, at this time slot, we couldn't have all of these amazing people on. Like, so
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
really tough. It's really tough. Peter in the chat's like, if you're really here, hold up 3 fingers. Huh, right there. But yeah, it's I'm so happy that we're able to do this. I'm so happy that we're able to pre-record, because this means that we'll be able to do collaborations with folks in East Asia. We'll be able to do more collaborations with folks like Safia and I are already talking about doing another episode on this really interesting survey that she did, and on like the community and their preferences in gaming. So I'm really, really excited for that.
Yeah. In addition, even in North America, where we live,
Yeah.
a lot of people cannot make a 7 p.m. Eastern time slot work, right? Like some people have like some weird working hours. So pre-recording and all this kind of stuff, I just think is a great vector for us to have more voices.
Absolutely. Because before, when we've had folks like Pam and Mahar on the show, they had to get up at like 6 a.m. to be on the show when we were streaming and when we were doing the Oriental Adventures read. And this just makes it so much easier to do. Like the entire time that everyone was talking, I was experiencing everything again and like taking notes and tidying up all the notes that I took. That said, folks, if you are looking for, extended audio of this episode, something that's a little bit cleaner, you can listen to all of that on Patreon. And we have some amazing, Patreon supporters to thank for that. And, for what we have coming in the future. We have Bubble Tea Book Club because of our patrons, and fingers crossed in the future, we'll have Dungeons and Asians. And I've been thinking about it, this entire time. I don't say fingers crossed because I know we will have it, because our community is awesome. But I was thinking about Dungeons and Asians And like, we're going to pre-record that too, again, because we are already talking about a cast that are all across like North America, and then we're going to expand it. But if we could pre-record, what I was thinking? I was like, oh, it'd be really awesome if we could do this with the pre-recorded Dungeons and Agents episode, and then, the cast and the GM can be in the chat answering questions live about it. It's like being able to talk to the GM while they're actually gaming. So I want to try that out. But that said, we have some folks to thank. We have all of our guardians of the Sky Court here. We've got our disciples of the Sky Court. I'm so sorry. It's really late. Because this stream has been going on for almost 3 hours. Again, probably our longest podcast episode. We have, our Guardians of the Realm, again, Brooke, Bright, Pixel Grotto, Jeremy, and Daisy May. Thank you so much for your support. Y'all are awesome. And then, of course, our most honorable patrons, Ryan the Wizard Hall, Metal Weave Games. Go check out that Owlbear plush, Baby Bestiary, and again, another game that's coming out, the Hyperlight Drifter RPG, that yours truly consulted on. I'm super excited. Andreas is an awesome member of our community. And speaking of another publisher, Valorous Games, who's just on the latest episode of Bubble Tea Book Club and will be on our Caratur stream tomorrow, where we'll be talking about, that's right, Kung Fu action. Oh, it sounds weird when we're talking about it in the context of D&D. But Kung Fu action, martial arts masters, and just some of the strangest things in Caratur. We're restructuring how we're doing the Caratur stream so we can be more concise and move on to some other things, because Emma's like, when are we going to talk about Wa and Kozakura?
Yeah.
And we're probably going to have to talk about L5R 5E in the future. So,
well, if you need someone who's an expert in L5R,
you've read the entire core book.
Yep. And I got a lot to say about it. But also, I'm actually really excited for this Kung Fu martial arts episode, because someone who, like myself, I grew up being a very athletic person. Mm-hmm. But this actually happened in the Vietnamese episode, where I was like, I actually didn't feel comfortable studying martial arts because it felt appropriative to me because of my diaspora and my trauma of racism.
That's
so
really interesting.
I'm so interested to hear it. And I bet a lot of our listeners and whatnot, anyone there who's Asian or multi-Asian, multi-ethnic Asian, they might also feel that tension. And also, I'm here for you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve, because after that recording that we did, Izza was like, hey, can we do an episode on sort of the mixed Asian experience? And we are planning one, and we're recording it next Sunday. So I am super excited. We have some incredible folk on that. It's going to be great. And then, of course, we have some other patrons to thank. The most honorable Dungeon Glitch / Matt, and the most honorable ×2 Epic Impulse. Marla is ready to thank all of you. She's been waiting over here and has been very, very upset. Unsung hero of the stream is Sarah, who gets Marla every single time.
Marla hates this every time. Marla is never happy about this.
Hi to everyone, please. You want to say hi to everyone, Marla?
She's confused. She doesn't like this.
You want to say hi? Mwah. We love you, Marla. And Marla loves stream. Right, Marla?
Mm-mm. Oh, we got a little something.
We got a little something. Okay. Bye, Marla. Yeah, Marla loves all of you, especially the most honorable of patrons. If you want to support us, you can head to patreon.com/AZNSrepresent. We got show notes there. We have new stuff coming out, and a new episode where Agatha and I are going to be talking about what we want to do for our wuxia game. That's coming out. So super excited. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. That said, stick around. We are